You ever notice how every generation thinks the world's going to hell right before it changes for the better? Well, that's exactly how it felt in 1969. Now, before I take you to that muddy field in Bethel, New York, you've got to picture where we were coming from. The 60s weren't just peace and love, they were also napalm, assassinations, and a country arguing with itself louder than a garage band on payday. I was 24 back then, hair down to my shoulders. What little of it I still had was black, and I thought I had the world figured out. My old man wore crew cuts and swore by Eisenhower. I wore bell-bottoms and swore at Nixon. That was America in a nutshell. 2 generations, 1 TV, and 1,000 arguments about what it all meant. We'd been watching the world change on television every night, Vietnam burning on CBS, civil rights marches on NBC, and Walter Cronkite frowning like a disappointed father. We'd lost Martin and Bobby, and it felt like hope had packed its bags and left town. But we still had the music. Oh, the music. You could walk down any dorm hallway and hear Dylan rasping from one room, Hendrix shredding from another, and somewhere in between a couple of kids making out to the Beatles' Abbey Road. Music wasn't background noise, it was oxygen. So when word started floating around about this 3-day festival of peace and music, most of us figured it'd be a nice weekend getaway, a chance to hear some bands, maybe meet a cute girl, and forget about the war for a bit. None of us imagined we were about to walk into history. Tickets, yeah, they printed some. I think I actually bought one, $5 maybe, but by the time we got there, the fences were down and money didn't mean a thing. It's funny, capitalism just sort of gave up for 3 days. I still remember the ride upstate. 6 of us crammed into my buddy Ronnie's beat-up VW bus, which smelled like patchouli, potato chips, and bad decisions. The radio kept cutting out, but every time it worked, we heard the same news. Traffic backed up for miles near Bethel. Ronnie grinned and said, "Guess we're not the only ones chasing enlightenment." He wasn't kidding. About 10 miles out, the highway turned into a parking lot. We ditched the van, grabbed our sleeping bags, and started walking. People were leaving notes on windshields, "See you at the stage," like they were leaving breadcrumbs in the woods. Cars stretched to the horizon, and yet everyone was smiling. It felt like the first day of summer camp for 500,000 kids who'd never met. When we finally crested that last hill and saw the field, my jaw dropped. Rolling green hills covered in people, laughing, singing, setting up tents that would never survive the rain. The stage looked like a wooden ark waiting for a flood, and in a way, that's exactly what it was. There was something electric in the air, and it wasn't just the amplifiers. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the collective smell of 400,000 unshowered idealists. Hard to tell. We staked out a spot not too far from the stage, close enough to hear, far enough to breathe, and that's when I realized we were witnessing something new. Nobody cared about your clothes, your skin color, or where you came from. You shared what you had, and if you didn't have anything, somebody gave you some of theirs. It was like civilization rebooted itself and forgot to install greed. As the sun went down, the first notes drifted through the valley. Richie Havens hammering his guitar like he was fighting for his life, chanting freedom until the words stopped being a lyric and became a prayer. People cried, hugged strangers, passed around sandwiches, and let's just say other things. That's when I thought maybe the world isn't doomed after all. Of course, I had no idea what was coming, the rain, the mud, the music that would tear open the sky, but that first night, it felt like the world was finally exhaling. I woke up that first morning with a back full of rocks and a mouth that tasted like I'd been chewing on a boot. Ronnie was already sitting up, grinning like an idiot, holding a cup of coffee he swore came from a guy with a portable stove and a dream. That's how it was at Woodstock. You didn't ask questions, you just said thank you. The field looked different in the daylight. It was beautiful, all rolling hills in color, but you could already tell the place wasn't built for this many people. There were tents half collapsed, people sleeping under ponchos, others passed out under tarps that looked suspiciously like shower curtains. And the smell, well, let's just say it was an experience, a mix of wet grass, sweat, incense, and whatever mystical herbs were floating around the crowd. Someone had brought a bubble machine. I don't know where they plugged it in, maybe divine intervention, but those bubbles floating over the morning haze looked like tiny planets. People were still arriving, walking for miles, barefoot, smiling like they'd found the center of the universe. The music started early. Nobody really knew who was playing half the time, and announcements got swallowed by the wind, but it didn't matter. You could just feel it. Somebody strummed a chord, somebody else hit a drum, and suddenly the whole valley came alive. It was like the earth had found its heartbeat. Then came the rain. At first, just a drizzle, soft, playful. People laughed, lifted their faces to the sky, spun around like children. But within an hour, it turned biblical. Sheets of water, tarps flying, mud everywhere. If you've never tried to sleep in a flooded sleeping bag, let me tell you, it's humbling. Ronnie shouted, "We're all gonna melt." I told him, "Nah, we're just being baptized." He didn't laugh, probably because his shoes had floated away. The mud, oh, that mud, you couldn't fight it. It crept into everything, clothes, food, your soul. But something strange happened. Instead of complaining, people started celebrating it. They slid down hills, smeared it on their faces, wrestled in it like kids. It was chaos, but it was joyful chaos. Someone yelled, "We're all part of the earth now," and honestly, it was hard to argue. You have to understand, none of this was supposed to work. 500,000 people, barely any food, no real bathrooms, constant rain. By all logic, it should have been a disaster. But somehow it wasn't. Somehow it worked because we worked. People shared food, helped strangers, laughed at problems that would have driven most folks insane. I saw a guy build a makeshift walkway out of flattened cardboard boxes so people wouldn't slip. Another guy passed around free sandwiches for hours. Nobody asked for anything in return. I remember sitting there soaked to the bone thinking, if the world could act like this for 3 days, maybe it's not hopeless. Then the real music started. I'll never forget when Santana took the stage. We didn't even know who he was. Some kid from San Francisco, they said. But when that guitar started wailing and those drums kicked in, oh my God, it felt like the ground itself was dancing. People lost their minds. The energy in that crowd, it was like lightning bottled in sound. Later, Janis Joplin came out, wild hair sticking to her face, wearing what looked like the spirit of rock and roll stitched into a dress. She sang "Piece of My Heart" like her soul was on fire. You could feel her pain, her passion, the kind that makes you cry and grin at the same time. That woman didn't just sing, she bled music. And then The Who, loud, raw, angry, brilliant. When Pete Townsend smashed his guitar, half the crowd gasped, the other half cheered. Ronnie leaned over and said, "That's going to cost him." And I told him, "Yeah, but it's worth it," because in that moment, it wasn't destruction, it was release. That night, the rain eased and the sky turned purple and gold. Fires burned on the hills, smoke drifting like ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing "Here Comes the Sun" on an old acoustic guitar, and everyone nearby hummed along. For a moment, time stopped. There was no war, no politics, no fear, just that song and the feeling that somehow we'd stumbled into something holy. By the third morning, I looked less like a man and more like a swamp creature that had lost its will to negotiate with gravity. My clothes could have stood up on their own, my hair had given up completely, and my sleeping bag smelled like it had a personality. But here's the thing, and nobody cared. We were all in the same glorious mess together. If you had seen that crowd, you'd swear civilization had ended and peace had taken over. No one was talking about war or money or politics. Just music, love, and survival, mostly survival. That morning, as the fog rolled across the hills, the music never really stopped. I think Jefferson Airplane played somewhere around sunrise. Grace Slick stood there in that white fringe outfit, eyes wild, voice sharp enough to cut the mist. "Good morning, people," she shouted, like we were her children and she was welcoming us into a new world. I remember thinking, she's not wrong. Ronnie was lying next to me, half buried in mud, eating what might have once been a granola bar or possibly a very determined leaf. He looked at me and said, "You think the real world's still out there?" I laughed and told him, "I sure hope not." We were tired, filthy, and happy in a way that's hard to explain. It's not the kind of happy you get from a new car or a raise. It's the kind that comes when you forget everything you're supposed to be and just are. And then Hendrix. It was Monday morning, the festival technically over, most of the crowd gone, maybe 30,000 of us still there, half asleep, half dreaming. Then this wiry guy with a red headband walks on stage like he's got thunder in his pocket. He plugs in, gives a little smile, and unleashes something the world had never heard before. He started with "Message to Love," then "Voodoo Child," and then the "Star-Spangled Banner." Now, I know that song. I grew up standing in classrooms with my hand over my heart, reciting the pledge, singing that tune before every baseball game. But that morning, it sounded like nothing I'd ever heard. Hendrix twisted that anthem until it bled. Bombs dropping, screams in the feedback, the whole ugly truth of Vietnam coming through his guitar. And yet somehow it wasn't angry, it was honest, it was beautiful. You could feel the air shift, people stood frozen, some crying, some with their eyes closed. A girl next to me whispered, "He's making it say what we can't." I think she was right. When he hit that final note and let it fade into silence, the whole world seemed to stop breathing for a second. Then applause, cheers, tears. It was church, it was protest, it was America laid bare. After Hendrix walked off stage, the field felt different. The sun was higher now, and the mud was drying into a crusty second skin. People started gathering their things, what was left of them. I saw someone leave a shoe stuck in the mud and just laugh, walking away barefoot. We didn't know it then, but that was kind of poetic. We came in clinging to the old world and left a little lighter. The funny thing about leaving Woodstock was how quiet the world seemed afterward. For 3 days, we'd lived in this roaring, beautiful madness. Music, laughter, and rain coming from every direction. Then suddenly it was just still. The walk back to the car took forever. What used to be a highway was now a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. We finally found Ronnie's VW van, buried under mud and smelling like something the 60s coughed up, and tried to start it. The engine made a noise like a dying kazoo and gave up. So we did what any sensible young men would do, sat on the hood, ate canned peaches, and watched the world go by. All around us, people were hitchhiking, smiling, waving signs that said Woodstock or bust, even though Woodstock had already busted. It was like the world didn't want to leave the dream yet. Someone drove by blasting with a little help from my friends, and everyone started singing. By the time we finally got home, my parents thought I'd joined a cult. My mom looked me over like she was checking for signs of possession. My dad just shook his head and muttered, "Well, I hope you found what you were looking for." I told him I think I did. He said, "Good, now go take a shower. You smell like a compost heap that found religion." I'll admit, re-entering the real world was a trip. You go from 500,000 people sharing food and songs to standing in line at a gas station while someone complains about the price of milk. It felt like waking up from a dream and realizing the dream made more sense than reality. Then came the newspapers, mud, drugs, and mayhem, the headlines screamed. Sure, it was messy, nobody's denying that. But what they missed was the miracle of it all. 500,000 kids, not enough food, no police presence to speak of, and somehow nobody burned the place down. That wasn't chaos, that was harmony disguised as havoc. When the documentary came out, the world finally saw what we saw, the sea of faces, the music, the rain-soaked hugs. The camera panned over the crowd, and there I was, blurry and young, dancing like my knees still worked. I called Ronnie and said, "We're famous." He said, "Yeah, but do we get royalties?" We didn't change the world overnight, but we sure gave it something to talk about. You know, the older I get, the more I realize that memory's a funny thing. It doesn't play fair, it fades, exaggerates, skips the bad parts, and rewinds the good ones until they glow brighter than they ever did in real life. When people ask me what Woodstock was really like, I usually say it was muddy, loud, and perfect. They laugh thinking I'm joking, but I mean it. Because perfection isn't clean, it isn't organized, it's raw, it's real. It's a million little moments stitched together by laughter and rain and the sound of a guitar echoing across a valley in New York. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my porch with a cup of coffee and these old bones start complaining, I'll close my eyes and drift back there. I can still hear the crowd chanting freedom in the distance. I can see the sky, the color of tangerines and storm clouds. I can smell the wet earth, the cigarettes, the fried food, and that, shall we say, herbal aroma floating through the air. And every time I think we were just kids. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know we were making history. We were just trying to feel alive. It's strange that we thought we were changing the world, but really Woodstock changed us. It cracked something open, showed us what people were capable of when they stopped being afraid of each other. Even now, half a century later, I can still feel that energy humming under the surface of everything. When people talk about peace and love like it was some naive dream, I shake my head. You weren't there, I tell them. You didn't see it work. Because for 3 muddy, miraculous days, it did. Now, don't get me wrong, we didn't come out of that field and suddenly fix the world. The 70s hit like a hangover, gas shortages, Watergate, disco. Not exactly the age of Aquarius we were promised, but you know what? The idea of Woodstock stuck around. You can still hear it in every protest song, every peace march, every kid who dares to believe the world could be better. I've had grandkids roll their eyes when I tell this story. Grandpa, they say, you talk about Woodstock like it was paradise. And I tell them, well, maybe it was, a muddy one with no bathrooms. They laugh, but I always add, you don't have to be there to understand it. You just have to find your own version of it. That moment when the world feels too big to handle and somehow music or friendship or love makes it feel right again. You see, Woodstock wasn't a place, it was a feeling, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Like hearing an old song on the radio that takes you right back to the moment you fell in love. Or bumping into an old friend after decades and realizing time didn't steal as much as you thought. Mine just happened to be 500,000 people deep in mud. If you ask me now whether it was worth it, the rain, the hunger, the miles of walking, I'll tell you without a pause, every second. Because for 3 days in 1969, we proved something simple but powerful, that kindness doesn't need permission, And peace isn't just a dream, it's a decision. Sometimes late at night, I'll play an old Hendrix record, turn off the lights, and let that guitar wail through the speakers. My wife yells from the other room, "You're gonna wake the neighbors." And I yell back, "Good, maybe they'll learn something." I turn the volume down and the room exhales. The years settle back onto my shoulders, but they're lighter than they were a minute ago. That's what these stories do if you let them. They take an old man and make him 24 for the length of a guitar solo. They take a weary world and remind it how to sing. If you felt even a flicker of that, if you could smell the wet grass again, if your heart remembered the way a crowd can turn strangers into family, then don't just wander off, pull up a chair on this porch of mine. Hit subscribe and come back next time. I've got plenty more where this came from. I'll tell you about the summer nights when the moon landing made us all astronauts, even from our living rooms. I'll take you down the road to the day Elvis shook the living daylight out of primetime. We'll walk through gas lines and disco lights, sit-ins and stadium shows, small-town dance halls, and big city dreams. Some stories will make you laugh, some might make you cry, and a few will make you call an old friend you haven't talked to in years. So don't be a stranger, tap that subscribe button, ring the bell if you'd like, and bring someone along who remembers or wants to. Around here, we're keeping the good times not just alive, but present. Same time next week, I'll put a record on you.